Hello together. I would like to welcome you to our virtual panel discussion on remote audits. My name is Moritz Pfeiffer. I'm a member of the executive committee in Switzerland, and together with my team, we are basically focusing on regulatory efficiency, product and services, and digitalization. Today is a special event. We do have 6 experts with us from the notified bodies, the MedTech industry, and the associations. Together with them, we are going to discuss their experience on remote audit, the pros and cons, plus the technical and social prerequisites companies and notified bodies need to prepare. It is not just about listening to them, it is also about interacting with you. We do have 2 different types of interaction. That means you can provide questions, and we are going to discuss them at the end of the panel discussion. Plus, we are going to ask you questions, that means polls, and we would like to have your opinion. So that means as more people are voting within those polls, we get a picture or a better picture of your view on remote audits. After this panel discussion, we are going to consolidate all of those results into one position paper, and this position paper is provided then to the regulators, to the notified bodies, to the MedTech companies, and obviously to all of you that are participating today in our event. So now I do have the honor to introduce at least 3 people. 2 out of them you're not going to see within the discussion. The first one is Stefan. Stefan is the manager at Unity and has a track record of more than 15 years in the medical device industry. He's going to consolidate all of your questions and tries to consolidate them in the best way so that we can have a good discussion at the end of the session. Hi, Stefan.
Hello, everyone, and to all the panelists. There was already a question if we can speak louder so that it's better understandable. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
Very good. The second one is Klaas. Klaas is team lead at Unity, has more than 10 years experience in the MedTech industry, and he's going to provide the polls depending on the process of the discussion.
A warm welcome also from my side. Hi.
Last but not least, I do have the honor to also introduce Heiko to you. Heiko is our moderator. Heiko is owner of Visatis Health since 2012. In his role, he is focusing on business coaching. He is accredited by the Swiss Federation and also in the EU EASM program. Furthermore, he has several board members, coaching startup companies. But before he founded his company, he had also kind of a long track record within the medical device industry. First at Synthes, then at Medtronic. Medtronic was like, in the end, he was the head of Europe for the 2nd largest business unit, Spine. And beside all of those things, he holds an engineering diploma from the University in Bochum, also a PhD in mechanical engineering from Michigan, and an MBA from Zurich and New York. Now I'm really looking forward to have a super exciting discussion and hand over to Heiko. Thank you very much.
Now I got unmuted. So once again, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to moderate this session. First of all, I'd like to talk you through the process. So we will introduce, I will first show to you a little bit the survey results that came in from the survey that was done by Unity ahead of this audit. Quite interesting. I will share my screen later for that. And after that, I will introduce each one of the 6 panelists, upon which each panelist will give a little statement explaining his general position to the topic of remote audit. We will do this introduction in the alphabetical order of the company, so don't be confused. And after that, we will dive into the topics. We listed quite a number of burning topics around the theme of remote audits, and I'm going to be very interested to see how our interesting panel will handle these questions and topics. So let me first, and then by the way, at the end, we have saved time for Q&A. So here is my task for you. Please, during our discussion. Think of questions that remain unclear or unanswered during our conversation, and send these questions in, and the good folks from Unity, particularly Klaas, will work in the background so that we have these questions available and they can be addressed by the panelists after we went through the topics. So that should be around 5:30 or so. Good. So I will share my screen. At least I'll try to. Here we go. Okay, you should see my my screen with the preliminary results of the virtual audit survey. In this survey, Unity has asked 40 companies with more than 52 participants answering on some initial questions. I'll just briefly touch on those because on most of these we'll get back to. So you can see here that about 50% of all companies that have been asked do already have experience in conducting virtual audits. And for 80%, which I find a pretty whopping number, the virtual audits already now have a substantial relevance. Interestingly, the majority of participants thinks that the current regulation, so that is the guidance provided by the regulator, is not sufficient, certainly a topic we will touch on today, and a total of 90%, so practically everybody subsequently says more guidelines are needed on this virtual audit. We also asked about what are potential hurdles for conducting virtual audits, and that's also quite interesting. It's about missing soft facts, obviously, when you're not personally in front of the team. Technical product documentation, we'll talk about that. Data protection is a big issue, and the virtual audit conduction itself, etc. So soft factors, hence, will also be a topic for us, which we will address in this webinar. Which areas bear the potential for virtual audits? You see here quite a list. I'm not going to go through all the details. Certainly it's ISO 13485. It certainly can be used for internal audits and subsequently for supplier audits and potentially CE certifications and others. Interestingly, 90% of the participants see cost savings, and I think we will not all be of the same opinion in our panel today about that, because there's other costs that will be introduced. At the end, the findings of this page, of this webinar, will be summarized in a white paper, and this white paper will be made available to the participants. Speaking of participants, I will now start with the introduction of the panel members. And we will start with Michael Bothe. Michael Bothe is working at DQS Medizinprodukte GmbH. You should see him now on the screen in Frankfurt. This is a notified body that you probably all well know since 1995. Michael's position is a co-head of the certification body, especially in active medical devices. In German, we would say he's an old rabbit in the field. So he has been 35 years in this field, particularly in technology management, business development, testing, and certification. His focus has been, for the most part, on the engineering aspects. Michael is also active in the German Engineer Society and the Society of Biomedical Technology. He's the chairman of the Notified Body Recommendation Group. It's a very important group that is kind of the interface between the regulator and the industry. Michael comes to us with a master in electrical engineering obtained from the Technical University of Braunschweig and an MBA obtained from Henley Business School. Michael, welcome to the panel. May we have your opening statement?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So thanks very much to the organizers who invited me to that session. So I take the pleasure and privilege to host that, despite the fact that I'm not in my office in Frankfurt. I'm enjoying a couple of days vacation down here at Lake Constance. Nevertheless, that's a demonstration that the topic is of high relevance, both to me personally, as well as also for DQS Med, my recent company. So just a small correction. I have been in my career part of and chairman of the notified body recommendation group. This laps back to 2015, so that's history right now. It was a pretty important role, as you mentioned, in talking directly to officers of the European Commission and trying to manage some of new aspects between industry and the regulators. But once again, this is about 5 years ago right now. So in my role at DQS Med, I share this position together with Dr. Feldman, who is working on the active medical and the non-active medical devices. I'm responsible for the active, and I see a lot of relevance in the topic of virtual audits, specifically for DQS Med, who is not the biggest, at least in numbers of assessors, where we have about 250, and as well as global presence. Global presence means quite often that you as an assessor have to travel quite a lot, intercontinental trips to US, to Asia, etc., which somehow took longer than the whole audit, and that's definitely a waste of time. And for the future to come, the whole entire assessment industry cannot afford this waste of time. Productivity is rather key, specifically under the regulated aspects of MDR. It's more than key, due to the fact that in future the majority of the assessment activities will no longer be audits, but will be technical file assessments. And the overall capacity demand between the old days from MDD and the new days from MDR are more than twice to triple in efforts. And as such, we are pretty much motivated to also not being passive, but being a strong implementer of these kind of virtual audits. And we run, meanwhile, holding-based activities to put that in place.
Good.
So that's in a short is me.
Thank you very much, Michael. We'll next, I'd like to introduce to you Ulf Hagedorn. Ulf comes to us from the company Dräger, or actually correctly Drägerwerk in Lübeck. It's most of you will know, it's a pretty old company, started in 1889. Dräger today has 14,500 employees, and last year reported 2.8 billion in top line. Ulf has a position of head of IMS audit management, quality and regulatory affairs. So he's responsible for keeping the certificates, but he's also the global group head for running the operations in regulatory for the 50 countries that he's responsible for. He's with Drägerwerk since 2007. He has experience also as an auditor. Ulf was at TÜV Süd, product service MedTech products for 7 years, obviously a notified body, and also in the MedTech device industry. So, and he's also responsible for the regulatory working groups, for example, ISO 13485. So the good news is that Ulf knows both sides very well. Very glad to have you on board. Ulf comes with an engineering degree in biomedical technology obtained from the University of Applied Science in Lübeck. Ulf, welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Heiko. It's a pleasure being here. There was a lot of responsibility in your introduction, but okay. Just a few statements on remote audits. I prefer the phrase remote audits and not virtual, because virtual sounds like if it's not a real audit. So for me, it's a remote audit. And first of all, I would start with a statement saying that remote audits are not new and are not the future of auditing, at least from my perspective. And I read this all the time, the future of auditing. But nevertheless, Remote auditing is a legit audit method, and from my point of view, that should be balanced with other audit methods. So it's an absolutely useful and adequate instrument, especially in situations as we have today. So in a world with travel restrictions and quarantine and so on, but also beyond that. As an audit manager in industry, I do see some benefits in auditing remotely, as well as some general disadvantages. And this relates not only to third-party audits, like notified body audits, but even more to internal audits. So you may call me old-fashioned, and I'm fine with that. But according to my experience in auditing, the secret of effective audits is to a significant extent really the interaction between human beings at all levels in an organization and in a face-to-face situation without limitations of ICT in between. So from my point of view, another important factor is the possibility to react spontaneously on observation made, say left and right of the audited item. So for example, during a production site walk or during a storage area visit, not directed by camera and not tied to a single office room. From my perspective, today's software tools, available hardware, and still, of course, depends on the location where you are, internet or network performance limit the possibilities and the flexibility in such audits, and kind of tend to foster more fixed, rather inflexible audit approaches. Like personally, I experienced, for example, the MD sub audit model. In addition, and I'm sure we will talk about that, there are several challenges like data protection and data privacy. Heiko, you had also in the introduction slides. And in addition, for example, the availability of records in an electronic format, I think is often a challenge. In regards to costs, so to my experience, time and cost saving effects of remote audits are partly overestimated, I would say. Okay. So however, I'm sure that audits in future will include remote parts, like today already desktop reviews, for example, tech file reviews. And I'm also sure that the share of remote audits will increase, also with further improvement of tools and also guidance given by regulators. But final statement, I also believe that remote audits will not completely replace traditional on-site audits. So let's talk about that.
Great, thank you very much, Ulf. We'll continue around with the introduction of Oliver Bisazza. Oliver is with MedTech Europe. Its office is in Brussels. His position there, he's the Director of Regulation and Industrial Policy. He's doing that since 2017. He leads a team supporting the industry members of MedTech Europe in the implementation of the EU regulations. His role is also to communicate MedTech Europe's positions to the EU authorities. Oliver has broad experience with various regulatory positions in the industry, also with Medtronic, and he's also in the trade association, having a role in Brussels for COCI, the trade association that pertains to certain areas of MedTech. Oliver was born and raised in Australia and also observed there a degree as a Master of International Politics. Welcome to the panel, Oliver.
Thank you, Heiko. So thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I think this topic, whether we use the term remote audits or something else, it's one of the hottest topics in medical device regulatory affairs right now. And I do agree with Ulf. This is not something that is being talked about as the future of auditing to ever replace or be better than the on-site experience. But our interest in this topic is very special because we are in historic times right now. A worldwide pandemic, which has shut down a whole bunch of movements of people, especially the international travel, has made it basically impossible for many auditors, in particular auditors in notified bodies, to visit on site the manufacturers whose systems and products they need to certify. Our interest in this topic is to explore to the fullest extent possible the remote audits, virtual audits, off-site audits, whatever you want to call them, to what extent can they help us move forward with the crucial work of getting medical devices and IVDs certified under the new European regulations? A certain number of notified bodies have gone through the very tough work of getting designated to these new regulations, and a bunch of manufacturers have gone through the intense work of getting ready for those regulations too. So these audits were ready to go before COVID-19 struck the world. And right now, because there is a question mark over whether we can move ahead with these audits without the on-site experience, it is resulting in many people having to put these audits on hold or postpone them to later in this year in the hope that life will be back to normal after the summer break. But that sounds to me like playing a little bit of Russian roulette. Huh? We might be out of the woods after the summer break, or we could be in a second wave. And if we don't find a way to move forward with certification of devices and IVDs under these regulations by then, it's going to leave us no choice but to go back to working under the old laws from the 1990s. Laws which are meant to be on their way out by now and which many people have claimed needed to be replaced by the new regulatory framework. So I say, great topic to have discussed today. Let's explore to the fullest extent possible that these audits can be used to help us move forward with the regulations.
Great. Thank you very much, Oliver. Good, great topic which we will dive into for sure. The next panelist I'd like to introduce is Dominik Ryterski. He's joining us from Medtronic. He's in the Medtronic headquarters in Minneapolis. His position is the Vice President of Corporate Quality, so he's responsible for the global quality strategy. He leads the corporate audits. He's with Medtronic since 6 years. Before that, Dominik had a broad industry career. He spent 20 years with companies such as Tyco, Covidien, now a part of Medtronic, and in Medtronic regulatory affairs, he had also several positions. Particularly interesting is that Dominik is one of the few persons who experienced probably all geographical regions. So he had responsibilities in Europe and emerging markets, Middle East, Asia, as well as the US. Dominik comes to us with a master in pharmacology obtained in Warsaw, Poland. Dominik, welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Heiko, and I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to our participants. Much like my predecessors, I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I believe it's very relevant. I do take a different approach, though. There's a nice saying in English: "Never waste a good crisis." And if this is not a crisis, I don't know what it is. And my company takes pride in being an innovator in the medical technology space, and also it is very diverse in terms of our portfolio and technology that we manufacture. That creates a lot of opportunities for us, but also poses challenges. And certainly this situation imposed a lot of limitations on the way we operate day to day, on the way we manufacture. As you all are very well aware, we had to introduce a lot of measures to protect our employees, to ensure that we are still able to continue manufacturing and delivering life-saving technologies, and this is true for the whole industry. And I think we were able to come up with innovative solutions, and creativity of our teams allowed us to continue and to provide those technologies to patients around the world. And I do believe that in our area, in the quality and regulatory space, we also have obligation to be creative. I personally like virtual audits because this speaks to me as of the future, and it actually does imply that we're using modern technology to conduct those inspections. As my predecessor said, this is a new reality, and it is not going to go away. I agree with what Ulf said. I don't believe that it can entirely replace traditional methods of auditing. Certainly there are limitations, but I think it would be amiss for us not to think how we can do it better. And I can tell you that Medtronic has experienced a lot of those audits already, both internal and external. And we've learned quite a bit in that process on the journey. And we are becoming better. And I have to say that this is true of the regulators, of the notified bodies, as well as other regulatory bodies around the world. They are really thinking proactively how to facilitate this, because they have obligation to protect their employees. No one wants to be responsible for spread of the disease, and at the same time, the world didn't come to a halt. Therefore, I do see this as a challenge, but I probably see this more as an opportunity. I do agree that we do not necessarily see reduction in the costs. I think those who believe that it is going to dramatically reduce the costs are mistaken, and certainly we have not seen that reduction. It does probably create additional challenges in terms of duration of those audits. What you can do remotely takes probably time, more time than what you would have been able to do if you were on site. But it does create opportunities to use other technologies that we haven't used so far. I mean, this panel is the best idea, is the best example, where we are meeting virtually and we're talking using video, which probably wouldn't have happened. It would have been a normal face-to-face conference. We would be sitting on stage on our chairs and responding to the audience. And I believe we can do this effectively remotely. So I am hopeful. I'm not blind to the challenges, but I do believe that there is an excellent climate right now for us to consider how we can do things more effectively, and certainly how we can partner better with the regulators to facilitate that work. So I'm excited about this, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Great, thank you very much, Dominique. Panelist number 5 joins us from Switzerland. I'd like to introduce Dr. Daniel Delfos from Swiss MedTech. Daniel is the head of regulatory affairs. He started this position rather recently, actually beginning of this year, earlier this year. He has experience from both sides, because he was before that 20 years with the company Mattis, which is a well-known orthopedic device manufacturer. He was running there the R&D and the innovation part. One of his famous quotes that I always like is "Innovation despite regulation." I love that. And before that, he spent 4 years at the EMPA, which is a material testing agency of Switzerland. Daniel comes to us with a PhD in material engineering, obtained both at the ETH in Zurich and the EPFL in Lausanne. Grüezi, Daniel.
Yeah, hello. So, well, my statement is very clear. I'm talking here for the Swiss MedTech industry, basically 600 companies who are member of the Swiss MedTech Industry Association that I represent. They have all worked hard to get ready for the MDR introduction actually last month. Now we got a 1-year postponement for a reason, and we have to use that time wisely, because one thing is sort of clear, you know, when you had the 4 years introduction, you basically just squeeze it by 1 year. It's not that you actually have 4 years that you postpone, but you squeeze it together. Now, if we squeeze the time out, we do not do those audits, the companies are ready, they are just wasting time. And this is why I cannot accept that we do not work with remote audits. I do personally believe very much so that 90% of the time of the audit can be well spent remotely. That is for sure. However, you got 10% where you basically need eyes on the floor. You need to see what's going on in production, logistics, wherever. So you want to see that. And my recommendation for this panel is we have to come up with a clear statement how to use those 10% of the time when you need eyes on the floor. And this is something we need. So the Swiss industry, and I guess I'm talking about industry worldwide, we need the possibility of remote audits. We cannot waste the time that we have been given by this 1-year postponement. That's my statement.
Great, thank you very much, Daniel. As you see, I am now disappearing from the screen. Don't worry, I'm still there, so you hear my voice. The reason is that the screen will only show 6 webcams, so I'll moderate from the background if you wish. It's my pleasure to come to the 6th and final panelist, Dr. Andreas Pode. He's joining us from TÜV Süd, probably one of the most famous notified bodies out of Munich. His position is Director of Active Medical Devices. He has been 15 years already with TÜV, another old rabbit, so to say, acting with non-active as well as active devices. He has also experience in topics such as cybersecurity for medical devices. I think that's a very important upcoming topic, functional safety, and as said, was the leader in the area of active medical products. Andreas comes to us with a degree in electrical engineering, particular focus on semiconductors from the Technical University of Munich. And after the PhD, also there, he has joined TÜV. Welcome, Andreas.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for being here. I would like to start my introduction with a short discussion I had with Hans-Heiner Juncker. So he's our interface towards the European Union. When I asked him what is a remote audit, according to what people think in the European Union, he answered, well, a remote audit is an audit where you did not spend a single second at the client. And I think that kind of statement could be true for many of those audits which we're currently doing in that crisis. So we're trying, or we have to avoid to get to the client doing an entire remote audit. But it also opens the discussion, and I hope that we come to that point a little later, is that the European Union says that remote audits for initial MDR audits, for example, are not possible. Having that in mind, that Hans-Heiner said, well, it's an audit where you did not spend a single second at the manufacturer. Maybe it might be allowed that I do 80% of the audit remotely, just spending 20% of the time at the client side, reducing the risk of infection and all those kind of things. And I think what is interesting, and maybe we come to those points, that we have different terms like remote audits, virtual audits, off-site audits, and everybody of us here in the panel, and I think also among you listening here, probably have a different understanding what a remote audit is, and we just have to be clear that there are certain levels of remote auditing, so partly remotely, entirely remotely, whatever. From our experience, we did a couple of remote audits already. They are maybe they have I think they have a similar effectiveness compared to an on-site assessment, with pros and cons, of course, but they definitely require a good preparation. So when we did the first remote audits, we bumped into problems. So connection was lost. We did not have a telephone number of the client. So until you reached him, as he was in home office, blah, 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 and all those kind of problems. So however, we also learned, and that is something I would like to ask you all, regardless of notified bodies or manufacturers, if you do a remote audit, please take a little bit more time to prepare the audit. And then I think it could be a good success story, at least for that remote audit time where we have to do the audit remotely. I fully agree with my colleagues, or also with Wolf, that probably it will not replace all audits, so we won't do all audits remotely, but of course it might be very helpful not to go to a R&D site for software development in Bangalore. There might be easy options. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andreas. We will dive into topics, in the various topics we will have prepared. I take the liberty of the moderator to pick on some of you, but I also encourage all of you to chime in to keep this lively. Let us pick up at the point that Andreas just made. What do we call this animal? Is it remote audit? Is it virtual audit? Is it offsite audit? I've now heard from all of you various terms. Is there a chance that we can agree on something? Andreas, you brought it up, so I pick on you. How do you distinguish the remote from the offsite from the virtual? And then we see if the other 5 agree.
Yeah. Well, technically, I think sometimes it's a good idea to have different expressions, because then you can move around a certain limitation. If considering that the lawyers in the European Union say or think a remote audit is an audit which is entirely remotely, and saying that might not be possible for MDR initial audits, regardless whether it's an existing client or new client, you could take that information and say, okay, then I don't do a remote audit, then I do a virtual audit or an offsite audit, then it's not a remote audit, therefore it's not forbidden. So actually, I'm quite happy that there are multiple expressions so that you can at least try to circle around certain pitfalls here. So I would like to keep it up with different expressions. Most people a virtual audit, well, Ulf said it might not be like a real audit. I think some other people say a virtual audit might be something where you guide someone through production with a camera, have a look here and there, please show me that cleaning record hanging on the wall. That might also be a virtual audit, but to be honest, there are no clear definitions yet.
Right. Michael, I pick on you as well as the other notified body here. Would you agree, or do you have guidelines internally for communication? How do you handle the topic?
So we are pretty much on the side to call it just, the positive thing is non-on-site, which automatically is an off-site audit. And I think if you look on MDR expression, there are two types of assessors specified. The one is, and we are talking about this person right now, is the on-site assessor. And as part of that, it's pretty clear there's at least a certain fraction to be performed on-site. If it's 10% or 20 or 25, whatever, I think regardless of that, to have the opportunity, which is at this point in time somehow limited, specifically for the regulated part of the business, is open up new opportunities. And the opportunities I'm still heavily convinced upon is not so far the cost-saving thing. This comes maybe at a later stage if this thing has been pretty much more matured and pretty much more how to say adopted from all the people, including the people who are conducting the assessments or the on-site assessors, as well as from industry. But what I'm still a strong believer is that there is a huge level of productivity gain, even if you consider that there are pretty much more efforts in the planning phase, the running of that kind of audit, which might be pretty much more segmented rather than today, and in consolidating the results of the various streams being done from maybe a bunch of non-on-site, means off-site auditors in parallel, rather than sitting together in a couple of meeting rooms and talking face to face.
Great. Well, let's see what we have in terms of experience. I'd like to call on Ulf and Dominic. I mean, you are both representing large, important players in the industry. So how did it go with the virtual audits? Particularly to your remark, Dominic, that you have already lots of experience and you mentioned some learnings. So I think it would be great if both you, Ulf, and Dominic could share a little bit of this learning.
Okay, Dominic, you would like to start, or?
I'm happy to start. Thanks, Ulf. So as I said, yes, we've had quite a bit of experience, and it's both on the external as well as internal audit side, and we work with multiple notified bodies as well as multiple regulators. So we've had a chance to experience all this, and I think Andreas alluded to that. Preparation is key, and practice makes perfect. I guess perfect is probably what we can hope for, but it does prepare you for the next stage. So I do realize that I represent a big company, therefore, you know, we probably have quite a lot of resources, and we use technology that facilitates those audits. Maybe smaller players will face bigger challenges because a lot of companies are still very much paper-based, and having electronic records may be a big obstacle for them. But I would say that converting those traditional analog records is really important into an electronic format. I mean, this facilitates really that remote or virtual interaction with the auditing body. Certainly rehearsing and preparing before the audit, making sure that all the actors are properly trained and they realize what the responsibilities are, both in the front room and the back room, is super important. Agreeing with the auditing body up front on the technology that is going to be used, such as the platform for communication, whether it's going to be MS Teams, Zoom, WebEx, or other platforms, but also having virtual repository of documents such as Box. This is really important. Assigning access to people and making sure that it works prior speaks to that efficiency that Misha mentioned. If you agree fairly early on how to do this, how to work out the mechanics, this really makes this experience much better. Another issue that we have experienced is time zones. And global manufacturers, they have headquarters in different places, and also sites are different in different locations. Therefore, people have to be cognizant of that when they're planning it. I mentioned in my opening statement that we've seen increase in the number of days that those audits take. It's mainly because of those time zone differences, where you can't really have full 8-hour day like you would have with traditional audit. So I would say that our experience is growing, but we see a lot of willingness, goodwill on both sides, and I think that is probably half of the success already. When there is will to collaborate and there is understanding that there might be challenges and there's patience, this helps us to do that. But really preparing the records in time and before, making sure that everyone is aligned on the technology that is going to be used, that roles and responsibilities are properly assigned, and that there is also understanding on the duration of the audit and the timelines. I think these are the key things that need to be addressed.
Great, thank you very much, Dominic. Ulf.
I can absolutely second what Dominic said. So preparation is really key. I mean, we at Dräger is also not a really small, that is a bit bigger company, but nevertheless, also we have topics in regards to electronic records. So we have, depending on the age of the project, also a lot of paper records. This has to be thought about. This has to be prepared. In addition, I mean, it's easy to say, align on the software tools you use. But if every notified body or auditing company, whatever, uses a different software, it's getting complex. So I would really recommend to have some kind of checklist, preparation checklist in place at the manufacturers. What has to be thought about, which tools are approved, IT-wise, for example. Just to give you an example, we at Dräger here in Lübeck have right now like 4 approved tools. It's like Skype, Teams, WebEx, Web2Go. But we already had the first external body that wants to use this LifeSize, for example. So it's not approved by our IT. It's not checked if security and confidentiality of data is given. So this is something to be considered, and this is something where I would like to have some more standardization if possible. So also maybe amongst the regulators or the notified bodies. So if everybody uses different software tools, it's getting complex. Please also think about sharing information and files. So email, I mean, as long as this is not encrypted end-to-end, is not an acceptable method to transfer confidential information. And think about also that in a remote, or however you call it, a virtual remote audit, there's a lot of information shared that was never intended to leave the site or the company. So this is something I really like the idea of remote audits, as I said, but there are some things you have to think about before.
Great,
and
thank you very much.
Last topic, Heiko, and we especially during the Corona times here, or when it was really at the top of the disaster. We also learned and experienced a lot of limitations in the internet and the network. So especially video broadcasting was not possible for several weeks or months. It's really something, so you have to be prepared also to do that via audio only.
Yeah. Great, thank you so much. I mean, these were very, very practical tips and tricks. Very, very good. I'd like to call on Oliver to also share a little bit his experience, Oliver, and particularly maybe out of the perspective of the not so big companies. I mean, we all know that the Dräger and Medtronic, etc., they have certain resources available that to many of our members, which are small companies, medium-sized companies, etc., are not available. What would you say? So how do the smaller companies deal with all that?
Yeah, you know, I don't think it's necessarily the case that you've only got the resources to use all these modern electronic tools if you're a massive multinational. I mean, we know very well in this industry, some of the most innovative startups and small companies are really, really tiny, and they're living in the 21st century. Let's not forget as well, we're talking here about audits primarily under the new regulations, right? MDR and IVDR. Those regulations require our technical documentation to be clear, organized, readily searchable. And for almost every company I've already spoken to in this business, they interpret that to mean getting away from paperwork and having things in electronic format. I think the feedback of Dominic and Ulf is very important, and the experience of the notified bodies with these virtual audits is also very important, because from that we can identify some best practices about how to do these audits better and some things to avoid. So harmonizing that would be great, but I don't necessarily think smaller companies are at an inherent disadvantage here.
Okay. Good, thank you, Oliver. Daniel, what do you see? I mean, also in Switzerland, we know that, I don't know, 90% of all MedTech players are small players. So what do you say?
That's absolutely correct. And I do not see any hindrance of very small to very large companies being able to do remote audits. I think as far as I have talked to those people in those companies, they all feel they're ready. However, they don't know exactly how much time does an auditor need to spend at the site, because as we talked before, there needs to be some eyes on the floor. They need to go into certain rooms, certain production units, stock, and check out a few things. And that's the thing we don't know. And that's why the Swiss companies are a bit hesitant to say, yes, let's go ahead with those remote audits, but they are ready to have the audits, and all of them have been postponed. So that's a bad situation, and we have to remedy this. And I think I also call upon Oliver, MedTech Europe. I'll help you, but yes, we need some guidelines pretty shortly, because it's important.
And we'll get to that, to the guidelines and the regulator. And I called Michael the old rabbit, and there's also another term that Michael used at the intro, that's the poor pig. And the poor pig in German is always the person squeezed in the middle. And I want to call on you, Michael and Andreas, because I have the feeling you as notified bodies, on the one hand, have to deal with the companies that you audit, and on the other hand, you're sort of bound, I trust, by the regulator itself. So do we need other regulations? I mean, there is something we mentioned in the preparation, the ISO 19011, there's MDCG 2020, ISO 27001, so we're not short of text, as I usually say, but is that enough? And is it flexible enough to allow to do the virtual remote audits in the way it should be? What do you think?
Andreas, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can start, no problem. Well, it depends a little bit on which regulation we are looking at. I think we are quite happy with what the European Union said in terms of our surveillance activities for the directives. We are not happy, definitely not happy, that MDR initial audits are more or less not allowed, or MDR initial audits to be done remotely. Because that one moves, so we are all trying to, or now moving away the initial audits to a later point in time. And of course, sooner or later, we were running out of time. And that is really a burden for us, that we want to perform those audits remotely. That is what we wish. Currently, it's not possible, at least not allowed, or possible or allowed or explicitly allowed. I already mentioned that there might be a certain room for interpretation, what the regulation says. What is also kind of tricky, at least within our notified body, as also our certification body is sometimes kind of strict, that we are bumping into problems with the MDSAP program, as the regulators in the MDSAP world still require you have to do that and that and that. You have to be on site, full stop, no discussion. And I said, well, I can't. If you just tell me, okay, I can do 80% now, but still have to go to each of those facilities later on in autumn or early next year, that also produces a lot of troubles. So the answer whether I'm satisfied or not depends on the regulation we're looking at. And what I would be absolutely happy if the regulators would, those ones who are more strict at the moment, or the regulations which are too strict from my interpretation, would open their mind a little bit and say, okay, then do it remotely, do your own risk assessment whether you can do it or not, and then go. All the other things like mentioned, which tools to use and those kind of things, I think probably that's something we can more easily clarify among us using the industries which we have here. I don't think that we need the European Union or any regulator to tell us what tools to use, but they should, let's say, open their mind.
Good. Michael, you concur?
Yeah, so absolutely correct. So specifically, if you look in a broader sense on the procedures being carried out for conformity assessment, you should have a clear understanding what the way forward will be. And many of you know that there is a huge activity ongoing to make an integrative approach for integrating MDSAP 13485 plus MDR audits in one audit. And at the very end, I think it's regardless how many percent there need to be on-site. If there is still on-site needed, and I'm a strong believer that during the next couple of years, let's phrase it 5 years, we would not come to 100% virtual or remote audit. And if you look back on the starting point from the MDR, which was somehow linked to the PIP scandal, trust is one thing. You can trust to a certain level, but better than trust, it's a certain level of control. And this certain level of control needs, in any case, a certain level of presence at the manufacturer's premises. And over 100% ban, you can just fight that with a travel ban. You can just fight that with making more utilization of locals rather than trying to send people over the oceans to carry out these audits on site.
Great. Oliver, just short question, short statement. Does MedTech Europe have this on the agenda, this kind of tension between what the regulator puts in writing, what the companies maybe want, what the notified bodies maybe want? Where are you in this field?
Absolutely. I mean, this is really a hot topic right now, and I fully understand it's a lot of things for the regulators to balance here, because we all seem to be in agreement. We're not looking to replace permanently on-site audits. They're written in the regulation as what is expected. But we believe those were written for regular times, and let's not forget that we're in extraordinary times here. For the temporary period of time, we hope, while we're all recovering from this pandemic and we're trying to resume the international travel once again, just for that short period of time, we need to exploit every possible solution to help us move forward with the regulations. So by all means, let's not just tolerate anything. Let's not tolerate someone walking around the manufacturing site with a grainy iPhone 1. You know, let's put some of the pressure on the industry to actually make solid efforts with the technology and put the auditor in a maximum level of comfort. But let's spare no effort to make this happen, because the consequence, if we can't do it, could be the availability of some devices. Let me just also add that many notified bodies have telling our members that if we want to bring a new device to market, if we want to bring an innovation that could do really important things like protect ICUs against saturation, new devices, so according to some notified bodies, they need to go through the regulations. Notified bodies aren't so set up anymore to take them through the directives. So if we can't make the regulations work and we have to go back to the directives, it seems only to be a solution for those legacy devices, and we might postpone access to some of the exciting new innovations that can help bring healthcare forward.
Right. Thank you, Oliver. Daniel, I allow myself, because I know you since many years, to ask a provocative question to you. Being Swiss and representing Switzerland, what are the options here? Is Switzerland sailing along with Germany? Are you calling Oliver every week to align your positions? Is Switzerland having, as we say in German, the extra sausage, or how are we doing it?
Okay, on a political level, we're not in a good place at the minute in Switzerland, because our political leaders do not know if they want to really adhere to the EC, the European Common Market, or not. So this will reflect on the medical products as well, as the MDR comes into place next year. We are faced of no longer being Switzerland, but Swaziland, basically a third country to Europe. So at the minute, I'm really, really happy if I can talk to Oliver and he allows me to give my input, because it's basically, he's no longer required to do that, but of course he listens. We are a part of Europe, we're right in the middle of it, in the center, and we feel it's a really not a good political situation. So I am fighting hard inside Switzerland to get some understanding of the politicians that we need to sign that MRA before May 2021.
Yeah, and
so
I can confirm it's a heated political discussion, even in sober Switzerland. Good. Next topic I'd like to discuss, and I take the role of the moderator and also take some questions that trickle in from the audience. And one is about the cost reduction. I mean, Ulf was, let's say, skeptical on savings. Michael has shared with us in the preparation, well, yeah, we might save some travel costs, but then, you know, how many auditors do we need, and who is the poor lead auditor who has to put this all together? So what's the bottom line here? And by the way, before you answer, let me mention that the good folks at Unity in the background, they do this short surveys where you can participate, you participants online. So please do that. But let's get back to the question. So what are we doing with the costs here? Where is this going to go? Can Ulf and Dominic report to their CFOs some substantial savings because audit costs are going to go down and they can spend that money somewhere else, or are Michael and Andreas going to say, nah, not at all, it's going to be more expensive? So what are we expecting? Ulf,
Let
you
me
were
start.
skeptical. Ulf, I call on you were skeptical.
Yeah. I said it's a bit overrated. So of course, and again, it's a bit different between third party and internal auditing. But of course, for sure, you save travel expenses and travel time. That's for sure. You don't have to send the auditors around the globe by plane or whatever. That's for sure. But as already said, preparation time is substantially more efforts, and also the duration of the audit itself. It's not running that smooth as it's on-site traditionally, for different reasons. But this takes longer time. So at the end, I cannot really say is it equal or not. I don't know. By the way, experience is getting more expensive all the time. Nevertheless, if it's on-site or off-site.
I would echo what Ulf said. We're actually seeing an increase. Certainly, the price tag from notified bodies has gone up, and I understand that this is a result to a large extent of their preparation for EU MDR and the need to hire more resources. but yet to be discussed further, I guess, because this is a topic where we need to understand what is driving some of those costs. But immediate reaction to cost reduction, I do agree with Michael that it may, in the longer term, we may see productivity gains in terms of working remotely and doing this offsite. However, I want to stress that we will never replace fully, in my opinion, on-site audits. So this is going to continue, and I wouldn't really hedge a bet on big reduction there. It does require quite a bit of resources to be involved. I mentioned earlier preparation beforehand and also availability of people. So from my perspective, not only we have not seen the reduction, but we actually are seeing an increase, but it may be coped with EUMDR costs.
Okay, good. We've heard, let's talk a little bit about the soft factors of the whole thing. Clearly, when talking, or even if it's a webinar like now or a video call, there's certain things you miss, certain soft factors that don't come through. How bad is that really? So are the auditors really going to miss the holistic view of the company? Is the whole relationship and trust building at the coffee machine and wherever, is that an issue? I also want to pick up one of Michael's statements. He said in his company, what did he say? About a third of the auditors are above age 60 or 62. How are they going to deal with that? Doing this all remote, they didn't grow up with that, etc. So what are the feelings here? Open question to all.
Yeah, I think maybe I start answering. You definitely lose. All the non-verbal parts of the communication are lost. And this is definitely one of the factors which reduces the effectiveness and reduces the confidence building, as you called it. That was the reason why I'm quite happy with remote audits of known clients. I probably would have an issue if I have a brand new client and have to audit him or that client entirely remotely. That's probably something which is not going to work, at least from my feeling. Of course, you also win if you do it. If you have a good preparation, you also might be able to win or have some pros on the side of a remote audit, but definitely losing the interconnection. I think we are all human beings and we love talking to each other in the same room, not virtually. So I think, yes, definitely you lose things, absolutely. And so, again, also, I'm not expecting that we're going to get rid of on-site audits after the crisis. But during the crisis, I think we have to find out what we can do in order to get through those audits. And that's, I think, the main task. We have to separate what we have to do in the crisis and what we can do after the crisis. I think those are two questions. Yeah.
Okay, maybe just one piece of information I want to throw in. It just came up from one of our participants. He mentions that, please mention that ISO 19011 edition 2018 identifies in table A1 a nice overview of remote versus on-site and human interaction versus no human interaction. So there seem to be some sort of guidelines. Ulf, you're nodding, so you're applying that.
I know that, and that's fine, but the topic stays valid. I mean, there is definitely something lost if you do it remotely. By the way, the 19011 talks about remote audits, but also has no definition of that included, which is also interesting.
That's a good one.
But I think, and I want to second Andreas, I think at the time being, that is not our main problem with remote audits. I think the main problem is really how to help the industry through this crisis and how to really make audits possible, simply make them possible. And if there is travel bans and so on, there is no alternative to remote auditing. And this is something that should be accepted and supported also by authorities, my point of view. We can talk, and by the way, all of the documents talk about having on-site audits later on. And I think in the industry, nobody has a problem with that, to do that later, but at the time being, it's not possible, and we have to find alternatives to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you agree, Daniel? Thank you. Perfect. Yeah. So I think we agree on that. Let me just switch to the next topic, and that is related. It's about the applicable areas. There's one participant joining us who also mentioned we should think of for-cause audits, so especially after with FDA, field safety notice, manufacturing inspections, and so on and so on. But my question goes into what are the applicable areas of virtual audits? So Andreas and Michael, if you could pick your top ones that you would use from a notified body, and then I'd also like to ask Dominic what he would pick from internal, external audits seen from a large manufacturers. But let's start with the notified bodies here. What are your third areas for virtual audits?
Well, currently we are doing all surveillance activities we're trying to do remotely, whatever we can. We are still working on those MDR initial audits for existing clients. That's work in progress, let's call it that way. What definitely can't be done, I cannot do an unannounced audit at the client located in Brazil right now. There's no way. So we have to postpone those kind of activities in case we don't have the appropriate resources in that country. If we do have them in the country, it might still work, but if we don't have them, it's out of scope right now.
Yep. Michael, you concur?
Yeah, I would put it in a slightly different way, which is not controversial to what Andreas has mentioned. Everything which is out of the physical flow of goods. So the physical flow of goods is something you like to see somehow, from incoming goods inspection via the flow through the company, the warehousing, the production site, the subcontractors, critical predominantly, and that's something you need to see somehow. And even you order somebody going through all these places with a Google Glass or equivalent, that's not the same story. But everything which is somehow documentation rich in terms of provision of SOPs, etc., you can easily do from elsewhere in the world.
Okay. And then, as said, Dominic, what are your preferred areas where you think internally and maybe externally, where do you employ it with pleasure, so to say?
Well, I have to say that we employ it wherever it's necessary. I don't know about the pleasure, but there's a necessity to conduct those audits because, as I mentioned, the world is not standing at a standstill right now. But I agree with what Andreas and Michael said. Certainly, you cannot do the unannounced audits. You can't do the for-cause audits remotely. And US FDA, in particular, when they issued their guidance on postponing audits, they left that exemption, meaning that for-cause audits would still be conducted on site. Obviously, they would consider what kind of provisions have to be taken in order to do that, and we're seeing this with other regulators as well. I believe that you can do really a lot remotely, and as I said earlier, we're seeing that those audits are venturing into different areas. Actually, they may be even more thorough now. When they're done remotely, and some of the documentation would have been probably not considered because you have to divide your time between the shop floor and the actual walk and the documentation. But we can do probably majority remotely.
Good. At this time, I share a little bit input also that we're getting from our listeners. So we see some remarks that people are investing. So there's one company reporting they bought a documentation camera that then provides a real-time viewing of the paper documents. I think that also goes along with what Ulf said before. Prepare yourself and don't figure that out once the audit is ongoing, that you maybe need a camera. Another question they came up was, of course, confidentiality. So how do we deal, for example, with FMEA documents? So is there a protection for screenshots? Maybe also here quickly, Ulf or Dominic, do you see an issue with that?
Yeah. So we definitely see that. And actually, this is something on our list. So I think you have to establish an agreement with the other party that it's not allowed to record audio, video, and also do not do any screenshots. I think this is not routinely covered by the normal contracts. So this is something at least we as the manufacturer are prepared to have available to have a written agreement on that with the other party.
One last question. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Dominic.
I just wanted to chime in. I completely agree. There has to be an agreement. Obviously, trust issue that Michael mentioned, that's something that needs to be developed as well, but it has to be specified. What is allowed, what is not allowed. Traditionally, we were not allowed to take pictures, on the shop floor, and the same applies to those virtual remote audits. We have to agree what is allowed. However, I did mention that we're using technology such as Box because we know that it is secure, and we're making those documents available to auditors. And also, it's a bit of it's a trust issue. We are willing to be more trusting within the realm that we are working on right now. So it does require flexibility.
Good. Maybe one of the last question, because I also, as a moderator, have to watch the time a little bit to MedTech Europe and to Swiss MedTech. What are the expectations by and large towards the regulation authorities on virtual audits? I remind all of you that the outcome of this discussion will be summarized in a white paper by the good folks of Unity. So here's your chance to leave some wishes to get into that paper. Oliver and Daniel, do you have any wishes?
We have big wishes and big expectations. We published a paper on this topic just a week or so ago. We want the European Union authorities to publish guidance on the circumstances under which they'll allow these initial QMS audits, the QMS scope extension audits, and so on, to take place virtually. They've already done this, in fact, for audits under the directives, but we're hungry for similar guidance under the regulations. And we believe it's a very reasonable thing to expect. Just 1 month ago, for instance, the European Medicines Agency already provided guidance on virtual or remote audits for the pharma good clinical practice inspections. So we're not the only audited industry. I think the entire world is going through this very topic right now. Other sectors are having material put out there. I think it's time for the EU device regulators to do the same. And before the summer break, please.
Daniel?
I can only say I fully support what Oliver said. I have nothing to add, but keep in mind this picture, 4 years squeezed into 3. Now, please, this is urgent. It really is urgent that the audits can regain the speed that we need them to have. It's important for the whole industry to get the audits done.
No. Does any of you, maybe Andreas, Michael, Dominic, Ulf, who are like globally active to a certain extent, is this a European discussion we are having? Is one of the participants is asking that, or what's the international what's the international scope of that, or is that just something us Europeans plus Switzerland are cooking?
No,
so we are. Sorry. So we are looking globally, and globally is at least including MDSAP. Which has a very huge level of importance specifically for the the biggies within the industry. And as long as these two procedures haven't fully converged, which I expect might happen maybe next year or so, we need to consider this also on this global arena.
Andreas, you wanted something to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree. So we are not talking about Europe, we are talking about all the legislations we are covering. And as already said, MD-Sub is also kind of pain for us at the moment, because they are not allowing that much in terms of remote audit, or a little bit more stringent than the other ones. So it's not a European problem.
Right. Well, thank
Andreas,
you.
Sorry, Heiko.
Yeah.
And Andreas, one question to that. If you say MD-Sub is strict in that, so I have this MD-Sub transmittal number 2020-07. I mean, it allows a lot of remote activities, doesn't it?
Yeah, but then it depends. I don't know whether our colleagues in the US who are responsible for the MD-Sub audit are that strict, but then it turns out, okay, if you had a grade 3 in production, you are not allowed to audit that one. And there are tons of conditions in our quality management system which say, okay, you end up in most cases, you can end up in the fact that you're allowed to do a part remotely, but there's still an on-site part, and the on-site part has to be done then 6 months later or something like that, and that's still a kind of burden. So the conditions are a little strict at the moment.
Okay, but also your internal conditions, as I understood.
Yeah,
okay.
We have an internal fight as well. Yeah.
I have to look at the time. I would haven't believed that a regulatory discussion can be that interesting and that fun. Thank you, really, all 6 of you, so much. You engaged tremendously. You shared your personal experience, the practice within your company. I'll try to give you a short summary, a short conclusion on what I see to finish up this webinar. So if the people in the technic room can maybe put me back on screen somewhere. So, hey, there I am. No, I'm not. Hold on. I'm coming. Got to click this. Good. All right, good. Here we go. So I think one of the learnings is clearly preparation is key. So we need to figure out very practical things. And thank you so much there for your input on time zones, on roles, make checklists. I think these are very, very actionable inputs that we got from the panelists here for all the participants that you can take home. Another thing I took down is to convert analog records as soon as you can to be better prepared, and also think about a virtual repository that you would like to use. These are key things. I also take the message that remote audits will stay also after the COVID crisis, but we do need a good balance. I also hear that not every auditor, not every company is totally thrilled about remote audits, but I think if we can find the balance right, this will be quite interesting. The regulatory at the moment might be skeptical, even though the legal basis exists, but what I hear from you loud and clear is that we do need better guidance in some areas, particularly as long as MDR requires certain audits to be on site. Of course, in remote audits, we miss the flexibility that we typically have during an audit. We miss the personal chemistry. We miss sometimes how to deal with pure paper records. But I have the feeling that all parties presenting today, meaning industry, meaning industry association, meaning notified bodies, somehow have goodwill and good intentions and say, yes, we will deal with this. The technology is to a certain extent still shaky, even though I would say this webinar here today proves that it can work, and it can work quite nicely. Regarding the cost, yes, there is some travel time and travel cost saved, but from what I hear, it's not a big game changer, and the real amount of the savings still to come. It drives me it drives me to the following conclusion. For currently, it's of course a very adequate way to audit. It saves us in these very special times. We might need to find this good balance that I spoke about going forward. We might need some adjustments in the legal text here and there. We will probably end up with an on-site, off-site balance. It's clear, though, that audits are not only about compliance, but they're also about improvement. So it's about the trust and the people. And from that, I also hear we do need the personal touch. Final statement, also from an organizational perspective. Once again, I think it was a great discussion looking at this topic from various sides, from industry, from the MedTech organizations, and from the notified body. I must say I was thrilled by all 6 of you, very lively, very engaging. Unity will provide us with a white paper touching on these aspects that have been discussed. They will try to summarize this webinar into a paper that's going to be very actionable. And with that, from my side, I really once again want to thank the panelists, all 6 of you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the preparation call. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being so open. Thanks for sharing your experience. I found this extremely valuable. I want to thank the audience. I mean, we have a tremendous number of participants attending and still attending even toward the end of this webinar. And I think that's also fantastic for hanging in. Thanks for providing also input, providing some questions. Lastly, and very importantly, I want to thank the good folks at Unity for putting this together. There's a tremendous amount of work in the background and also additional work on the white paper that has gone into this. And I think you guys have done a really, really great job. And with that, I want to finish this webinar and thank you all for attending.